Since we're done with the i5-6500 and the NVIDIA side of GPU, let's jump to the AMD side. Today we're looking at the lowest I can go on the CPU and GPU. Welcome to Response PC, I'm Doug, let's game on. Quick disclaimer, I've tested the game with a fresh install of Windows, the game install, the up-to-date driver, and no junkware install. And a quick refresh, the minimum requirement for AMD side is the Ryzen 5 1600 and the RX 580 8GB variant. So we'll start with my lowest Ryzen, the Ryzen 3 1200, and the RX 570 4GB variant. We're going to play obviously at 1080p, low settings, and FSR enable. How does it fare? It fared quite well. We have an average of 44 FPS. The GPU is pegged at 100%, that's what we want. And the CPU is in the 60s, similar to the i5-6500 that we tested in the last video, often hitting the 90% of utilization. So I won't recommend to go lower than the lowest of the Ryzen that you can get. I don't have the famous FX 6300, so I cannot really test it, but I have some doubts. For the system memory, we're hitting 13.7, almost 14 GB of memory. So the 16 GB is fair for the minimum requirement. Next up, I've tried the RX 480 8GB, still lower in performance than the RX 580 by about 10%, but it should be about 10% more performing than the RX 570. And that's what we have about. We are at 51 FPS, quite close. The GPU is pegged at 99%, the CPU is the same performance, and the system memory is also at 13.5. So nothing really changed beside higher FPS. And the GPU is also using the entirety of the VRAM. Out of the 8GB, we're using 7.9. So let's say we max out the VRAM of the 480. I would have tried more RX 400 series for this testing, but my RX 470 and my RX 460 died while I was trying this game. I need to find a new supply. That's the thing when you deal with old hardware. You never know when it's going to blow out. Going back to the RX 500 series, the RX 560 4GB variant, we start to be under the limit of what I consider playable, which it should be at least 30 FPS. We are averaging 25 FPS with the RX 560. So if you look at the RX 460, I don't think it will work because it's even 10% lower performance than the RX 560. But the RX 470, which is a way jump ahead of the RX 560, you should be okay. But I don't have one, so I cannot test it for you. The RX 560 is a peg at 100%. All the 4GB of VRAM is used, and the CPU seems to wait a little bit for it to give him information because we have a 50 to 55% of utilization, a bit lower than the other card. I mean, the CPU is waiting a little bit. For the system RAM, we're using 14.3, a bit higher than the other GPU we tested. And lastly, the last card I have that can't play-ish this game is the R9 380 4GB variant. This card is exactly 2 years older than the RX 560, but theoretically it should perform better than the RX 560. And it does perform better because we get an average of 28 FPS, a little bit higher. But the issue I have encountered is we have a load of a dip in the teens FPS, making the game really unplayable. The starter is really high. I would not recommend to play with the R9 series or lower, because even when you start the game, you have a warning that your driver is not up to date, even when I've installed the latest driver available for this card. Anyway, that's it for the AMD side of things. My guess is the RX 470 that won, but I don't have one to test it. Next up will be the ARC GPU, Intel ARC, on real gameplay instead of the benchmark. Thanks to have come watching, and see you in the next one.